I still remember that morning at Altera Dynamics. The office hummed with energy, as usual. The clicking of keyboards, the soft murmurs of colleagues, and the faint hum of the coffee machine. It was all part of my routine, my world. I had worked at Altera for nearly a decade, dedicating countless hours to the company's most ambitious project, the Pulse. It was my brainchild, the communication protocol that made Altera the industry leader. I loved my work, even when it consumed me. My office, a small, cluttered space tucked away from the bustling corridors, felt more like home than my actual apartment. Stacked papers, faded sticky notes with hurried scribbles, and a small potted plant named Milo sat on my desk, a constant reminder that life existed outside these walls. That day, a mandatory board meeting popped up on my calendar. The email was terse, devoid of explanation. I hurried down the hallway, feeling a pang of unease as I entered the sleek, glass-walled boardroom. There, in his tailored suit and smug expression, stood Brandon Alcott, the CEO's son, freshly appointed as vice president. He greeted the room with a perfunctory nod, his posture screaming arrogance. Brandon wasted no time. He began outlining his vision for modernization, a cascade of changes that made no sense to anyone who understood the infrastructure. I raised my hand, my voice steady but cautious. Brandon, if we adjust the communication protocol that way, it could destabilize the entire system. The Pulse relies on synchronous data streaming. A shift to asynchronous would... He cut me off, eyes narrowing. Olivia, we're looking to innovate, not cling to outdated methods. If you can't keep up, maybe it's time you step aside. His words hit like a slap, drawing the room's attention to me. Burning eyes, sympathetic glances. I wanted to scream, to fight, but professionalism forced me into silence. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. My objections had been noted, and promptly ignored. My mind swirled with fear and anger. This couldn't be happening. I was the one who kept this project running, the one who fixed Brandon's messes when he made changes without consulting the team. Just an hour later, I was called into HR. The words felt surreal, effective immediately, irreconcilable differences, severance package. Brandon didn't even bother to fire me himself. He sent a bland, impersonal email. I sat there, numb, barely processing the sterile speech from the HR manager. Back in my office, I packed my belongings in a daze. Milo, the plant, went into the box first. As I dug through my desk, my fingers brushed across a USB stick labeled Pulse Backups. My heart raced. On impulse, I plugged it into my laptop, scanning through the files. That's when I saw it. An encrypted log that shouldn't exist. Curious, I decrypted it, and what I found made my blood run cold. It was a backdoor entry into the Pulse, intentionally coded to siphon data to an external server. I sat frozen, trying to piece it together. Brandon's cost-cutting changes weren't just reckless, they were criminal. Someone had altered my original code to create a vulnerability, and Brandon had signed off on it. As I stuffed the USB drive into my purse, a security guard appeared in the doorway, informing me that my time was up. I nodded, wiping a stray tear before it could fall. Walking through the lobby, I caught my reflection in the polished glass, disheveled, eyes rimmed red, but determined. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the box to my chest, feeling hollow. The city sprawled around me, alive, indifferent. As I stared up at the towering glass building, a whisper of determination slipped from my lips. They have no idea what they've done. I still remember the first day I stepped into Altera Dynamics. I was just an intern back then, wide-eyed and eager to prove myself. The lobby was a glittering expanse of marble and glass, sunlight streaming through the high windows, casting fractured light across the floors. Everything felt larger than life, and I was just a speck in its grand design. I threw myself into my work with unyielding devotion. While others clocked out at 5, I stayed late, reviewing codes, analyzing data streams, and troubleshooting. Errors. My small desk in the back corner of the IT department was cluttered with coffee-stained papers, tangled cords, and my prized possession. A framed photo of my graduation day, my parents' faces beaming with pride. I was determined to make something of myself, to become more than just another cog in the machine. The Pulse was my first major project. I remember the thrill of cracking the communication algorithm that no one else could figure out. It felt like solving a puzzle that had no edges, just infinite possibilities spiraling out in every direction. I became the architect of its heartbeat, the silent conductor of its flow. My name wasn't on the patents, of course. Brandon Alcott's was. Brandon appeared a few months after the Pulse's initial launch. He strolled into the office with a swagger that came from never having to earn his place. His last name was a golden ticket, Alcott, son of the CEO. While I spent nights fixing bugs and optimizing the protocol, Brandon spent his days in boardrooms, speaking about innovation and progress like he understood the weight of those words. My colleagues would snicker under their breath. He's just riding his father's coattails. But I wasn't one to gossip. I believed in loyalty, in hard work. I let it slide when he claimed credit for the stabilization patch I spent 2 months perfecting. I bit my tongue when he presented my communication overhaul as his own in front of the board. It's for the company, I told myself. If the company grows, we all grow. But the truth was harder to swallow with each passing year. Brandon's decisions grew reckless, his ambition unchecked. He would make drastic changes without consultation, launching features that weren't ready, ignoring security vulnerabilities. Each time I was there to clean up the mess, patching holes, stabilizing servers, preventing the entire infrastructure from crashing. He never thanked me, not once. People warned me. Oh, how they warned me. Lunch breaks turned into whispered conversations. My closest colleague, Sarah, would lean across the break room table, her eyes shadowed with concern. You know he's using you, right? You're doing his job for him. I laughed it off every time. It's just part of the job, Sarah. We're all a team. She shook her head. A team? You're the only one holding that project together, Olivia. And he knows it. I brushed her words aside, too entrenched in my belief that hard work would be rewarded, that loyalty mattered. I ignored the signs, the way Brandon's smile grew, wider as the accolades rolled in, the way his mistakes were brushed under the rug while I worked overtime to prevent disaster. I ignored the exhaustion that settled deep in my bones, the loneliness that crept in with every sacrificed weekend and missed holiday. I kept my head down, my fingers dancing across keyboards late into the night. I believed that if I just worked harder, pushed further, it would all be worth it. That loyalty would be recognized, that my sacrifices mattered. The day Brandon fired me felt like a dream, a hollow echo of disbelief. I sat alone in my tiny apartment, the walls pressing in on me. It was sparsely decorated, barely a reflection of a life lived outside of work. My laptop sat on the kitchen table, its screen still illuminated with the blueprint of the Pulse. It flickered in the dim light, casting shadows that stretched long and haunting. My hands trembled as I pulled it closer. I stared at the code. Lines, of familiar symbols that I had memorized like scripture. I knew every line, every keystroke. I had built this. I had breathed life into it. And I had been discarded like I was nothing. The anger came slowly, a simmering whisper that grew louder. With every passing moment, they had taken everything from me, my time, my loyalty, my belief that hard work mattered. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I began to type, the words forming with clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. They had no idea what I knew, no idea what I had access to. My eyes traced over the encrypted logs I had pulled before I left, the backdoors, the siphoned data streams, the vulnerabilities. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my lips. They thought they'd buried me, but I was still here, and I wasn't done. Moving on was supposed to be simple, a forced march into acceptance. I tried, I really did. I applied for jobs, polished my resume, and sent out countless emails, hoping that someone would see my worth. But Altera Dynamics was everywhere, its name plastered across tech journals, Brandon Alcott's smug face gracing headlines with nauseating regularity. The revolutionary vision of Brandon Alcott, one article boasted. Another hailed, the pulse a new era in communication. My fingers tightened around the edge of my phone as I scrolled through article after article. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape him. Emails trickled in from former colleagues, thinly veiled sympathies laced with whispers of chaos. The system crashed twice last week, one wrote. They can't stabilize the mainframe. Brandon's furious. Another mentioned power outages across several data centers. Outages I knew, with a sickening certainty, were linked to Brandon's reckless modifications. I deleted the emails without responding, my jaw clenched tight. But the whispers only grew louder. I caught wind of communication blackouts that left entire departments stranded, the very infrastructure of Altera hanging by a thread. And still, the headlines praised him. Brandon's vision, Brandon's leadership. He was taking credit for my work while letting it crumble beneath him. I couldn't sleep. My mind was a whirlpool of regret and rage, each thought dragging me deeper into the depths of everything I had sacrificed for that company. My time, my health, my belief that loyalty mattered. I clung to the memory of late, nights hunched over my laptop, eyes blurred with exhaustion, but driven by purpose. I had built the Pulse. I had held its fragile heartbeat in my hands, and he was going to kill it. My fingers hovered over the USB drive I had tucked away since I left. It lay on my desk, silver and unassuming, its contents a whisper of the past I had tried so hard to forget. I plugged it in, the screen flickering to life, and a wave of familiarity crashed over me. There it was, the Pulse schematic, the lines of code I had breathed life into, the encrypted logs I had uncovered just before I left. I scrolled through the data, pausing at the encrypted log that had sparked my suspicion. A dull ache settled behind my eyes, but I kept going, line by line, decrypting the information until my screen lit up with a flurry of text. At first, it didn't make sense. Just a jumble of code and IP addresses, lists of transactions, timestamps. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Brandon hadn't just been reckless, he'd been deliberate. Hidden within the code were vulnerabilities, ones I never wrote. Communication backdoors routed to off-grid servers. Data siphoned silently, rerouted and archived outside of Altera's firewall. My breath hitched as I clicked through the logs. Dates and times aligned perfectly with system updates Brandon had authorized. Cost-cutting measures, he had called them. Optimizations. But it was worse than that. He had been falsifying safety reports, cutting corners, and reaping the benefits while I was left to pick up the pieces. And it was all under his name. My work, years of sacrifice and loyalty, erased, overwritten with his signature. The weight of it was unbearable. I crumpled onto the floor, my back against the edge of my bed, knees pulled to my chest. The laptop screen glowed softly in the darkness, casting shadows on the walls that stretched and swayed like ghosts. My hands shook as I covered my face, tears spilling hot and fast. I felt hollow, gutted. Years of my life, gone. Stolen. My name, my legacy, swept under the rug of corporate greed. I screamed, the sound muffled by my palms, my body shaking with the force of it. All those hours, all those weekends, the missed birthdays, the dinners I skipped, the moments of life I traded for the promise of recognition, of loyalty returned. But there was none. Just Brandon's name scrawled across my work like a thief's signature. I sobbed until my throat was raw, my hands numb from gripping the fabric of my sweater. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware, uncaring. I had always believed that if you worked hard, if you gave everything, it would mean something. That loyalty would matter. But it didn't. Not to them. Somewhere between the silence of my tears and the flicker of my screen, something shifted. I wiped my face, my breath still coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back at the laptop, its screen still lit with encrypted lines of Brandon's deceit. My eyes narrowed. A new kind of clarity settled over me, a stillness that felt foreign and fierce. They had taken everything, but they hadn't taken this. They hadn't taken me. I straightened up, pulling my laptop closer. My hands steadied, fingers gliding, over the keys with a new sense of purpose. I sifted through the files methodically, cataloging, copying, and saving everything. Every report, every falsified document, every backdoor entry that Brandon had signed off on. They had erased me from the history of the Pulse. They had buried me alive. But I was still here, and I wasn't done. A whisper of a smile ghosted my lips as I leaned back in my chair, fingers still poised above the keys. The grief hadn't vanished. It still clawed at my insides, raw and festering, but it was tempered now with something sharper. They stole my legacy, I thought, a cold certainty settling into my bones. But I'll take back what's mine. Leaving. The city was easier than I imagined. One morning, I simply walked out of my apartment with a single duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I left everything behind: the cluttered desk, the coffee-stained memos, the framed photograph of my parents. I closed the door softly, the latch clicking into place with an eerie finality. I had rented a cabin miles away from the city, nestled in the shadows of towering pines and whispering oaks. It was small, almost claustrophobic, but its isolation suited me. The silence felt like a blessing, a soft cocoon where I could breathe, plan, and work without the constant hum of betrayal clawing at my ears. The first night was restless. I lay awake on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling as branches tapped against the window pane. My mind spun with fragments of code, half-formed ideas, and the echo of Brandon's smug voice. But by dawn, I knew what I had to do. The cabin became my fortress. I set up my workstation by the window where weak sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, casting latticed patterns across my keyboard. My laptop hummed to life, and with it, so did I. The first step was building the firewalls, walls within walls, layers of encryption that no one would think to unravel. I designed backdoor entries into the Pulse, embedding myself in its very core, just as I had once done in those late nights at Altera. Only this time, I wasn't stabilizing. I was destabilizing. I crafted lines of code like an artist brushes oil on canvas, careful and deliberate. I was rewriting the narrative, shifting, the balance of control. My fingers danced across the keys with the kind of ease that comes from years of practice, years of perfecting the very systems I now sought to dismantle. It wasn't enough to just watch Altera stumble. I needed allies. I reached out to old colleagues, those who had been pushed aside, dismissed, just like I was. Quiet messages sent through encrypted lines, whispers across digital spaces that only those with the right keys could access. I called in favors from cybersecurity specialists I had met years ago at tech conferences, the ones who drank too much bourbon and told too many secrets after midnight. They owed me for projects I'd saved from collapse, for the midnight phone calls where I talked them through catastrophic code failures. One by one they responded. Not with questions, just a single line of text. "What do you need?" And I told them. Everything. I described Brandon's manipulation, the back doors, the falsified safety reports. I sent them encrypted files, evidence I had painstakingly pieced together, proof of Altera's corruption. They didn't ask why I was doing it. They already knew. Brandon had burned more bridges than he realized, and now I would light the match. The cabin became my sanctuary. The smell of pine crept in through cracked windows, mingling with the aroma of stale coffee and burnt toast. I lived off caffeine and adrenaline, coding for hours until my eyes blurred and my fingers ached. I barely slept. There wasn't time. I leaked glitches into the pulse. Small, almost imperceptible bugs. At first, they were dismissed as standard maintenance errors, minor setbacks. But as the weeks passed, they grew more frequent, more unpredictable. Communication links severed without warning, encrypted files became corrupted, data vanished into thin air. Brandon scrambled for control. I saw it in the press releases. His confident smile replaced with tight-lipped statements about minor issues and routine maintenance. Altera Dynamics began to tremble under the weight of it, its polished glass walls cracking under the strain. I watched it all unfold from my cabin, my laptop screen flickering with news alerts and message boards buzzing with rumors. Brandon was slipping, and I was just getting started. The first major crash happened on a Friday, mid-afternoon, right as Altera Dynamics was hosting its quarterly review. Screens flickered and went dark, entire communication lines severed. Panic spread through the building like wildfire. Brandon's voice, usually confident and commanding, was reportedly strained and desperate as he tried to regain control. I watched the live feed from my laptop, a grainy security camera I'd accessed weeks ago, just in case. I saw Brandon storming through the hallways, barking orders, flanked by engineers who looked like ghosts of themselves. It wasn't enough to topple Altera. Not yet. But it was the first domino, the first crack in Brandon's carefully constructed facade. And it was beautiful. The whispers began to spread. Former employees who had been discarded without a second thought began to speak up. Anonymous posts on tech forums, encrypted blogs with first-hand accounts of Brandon's failures and negligence. I fueled the fire, feeding them more information, more evidence of his recklessness. Brandon's name began to rot from the inside out, tainted by rumors of incompetence and whispers of sabotage. Altera was crumbling, bit by bit, just like I had. Only I was still standing. I leaned back in my chair, eyes heavy with exhaustion but alight with purpose. The cabin creaked with the weight of the wind, a whisper of nature's indifference. My laptop hummed softly, the glow of its screen casting shadows across my face. I wasn't done. Not even close. The first day back in the city felt surreal. I kept my head down as I walked the crowded streets. The rush of bodies and noise a stark contrast to the solitude of the cabin. My hair was cut shorter, a shade darker than before. I wore glasses now. Clear frames that made me look like someone reborn. I had a new name too, Isla Harrington. It felt strange at first, like slipping into someone else's skin, but it fit. Isla Harrington was everything Olivia Harper wasn't. Confident, connected, untraceable. She moved through corporate circles. Like a whisper, her name murmured in low tones at tech conferences and high-end business meetings. My consultancy firm, Harrington Dynamics, was a ghost operation. No website, no advertisements. My reputation spread purely by word of mouth, disgruntled ex-Altera clients, competitors sick of Brandon's incompetence. They came to me with whispers of data breaches, communication blackouts, and vulnerabilities that Brandon's team couldn't or wouldn't fix. I listened to their grievances with a smile, sipped my coffee as they vented their frustrations, and when they asked if I could help, I merely nodded. I can fix anything, I would say, and it was always true. The news articles began to change. Brandon's face, once plastered across tech journals with captions of visionary leadership, began to fade. Altera Dynamics was stumbling. Contracts were falling through, major clients pulled out, citing concerns over security and reliability. System crashes became publicized, no longer brushed aside as minor glitches. I watched it all unfold from my new office on the 12th floor of a modest downtown building. The windows overlooked the city, glittering with lights and possibilities. My fingers tapped rhythmically against the edge of my desk as I read the latest report. Altera Dynamics loses major client to new competitor. That competitor was me. Through Harrington Dynamics, I had secured contracts with 3 of Altera's former clients in just 2 months. Their trust was easy to earn. I knew the Pulse inside out, its flaws, its weaknesses. I offered solutions that no one else could. They didn't ask how I knew. They just paid. I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Watching Brandon's empire crumble from my new office window was something I savored, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. My reputation grew. Invitations to tech conferences arrived in plain white envelopes, slid under my office door by hands I never saw. I accepted, always under the name Isla Harrington, always with a firm handshake and a confident smile. I met with CEOs, heads of cybersecurity, innovators looking to protect their empires. They spoke to me in hushed voices, behind closed doors, and I fixed their problems one by one. My anonymity only added to the allure. "Who is she?" I overheard one executive whisper at a gala, his voice low and reverent. "No one knows where she came from. It's like she just appeared." I smiled into my glass of champagne, the bubbles tickling my lips. If only they knew. It didn't take long for Brandon to feel the weight of my influence. Reports of his frantic press conferences leaked online, grainy cell phone footage of him pacing back and forth, his hair unkempt, eyes darting nervously as he tried to explain away the failures of the Pulse. I watched the footage from my office, my legs crossed, elegantly beneath my desk, the glow of my monitor flickering across my face. He was unraveling, piece by piece. His desperation was palpable. He was out of his depth, drowning in the very system he had stolen from me. But I wasn't done. Not yet. My opportunity came one morning in the form of an email, an encrypted message sent through a secure line from a competitor I had been circling for weeks. They wanted to meet. In person. The boardroom was sleek and modern, walls lined with glass that reflected the city's skyline. I stepped inside, my heels clicking softly against polished marble. 5 men sat at the table, their suits crisp, their expressions calculating. "Ms. Harrington," the chairman greeted me, extending a hand. I shook it firmly, my gaze steady. "We hear you have solutions," he continued, eyes flicking to the file he had laid out before him. The Pulse, blueprints, schematics, lists of its known failures. "And we hear you know its weaknesses." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "That's correct. And you're willing to help us?" I leaned forward, folding my hands neatly on the table. "Help isn't the right word. Let's just say I'm interested in reclaiming what's mine." The room fell silent, tension stretching between us like a taut wire, and then, one by one, they nodded. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe. The windows of my office were thrown open to the city air, a breeze rustling the papers on my desk. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the sill, sipping slowly as I watched the world move below me. I had built something of my own. Harrington Dynamics was thriving, its clients loyal and its reputation ironclad. And Altera Dynamics? It was crumbling, held together by Brandon's flimsy promises and hollow words. I found joy in the small things again. Mornings were mine, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of sunlight creeping through my blinds. Evenings were quiet, peaceful. I read books, took long walks along the waterfront, allowed myself to exist outside of a screen's glow. I was no longer just Olivia Harper. I was Isla Harrington, the woman who fixed the unfixable, the ghost in the machine. And now, I was ready for my final move. I had always imagined my return to Altera Dynamics would be triumphant, parading through its marble corridors, eyes turning in recognition of what I had built, what I had sacrificed. But when I finally came back, it wasn't through the front doors. It was through a series of encrypted emails, whispered conversations, and strategic leaks that rippled through the corporate underbelly like a slow, inevitable tide. I had been patient, months of planning, watching Altera stumble under Brandon's incompetence, his panicked attempts to salvage the pulse without truly understanding it. I had pulled strings from the shadows, orchestrated whispers among ex-employees, reignited the fury of those he had discarded. But now, it was time to step out of the shadows. It began with the whistleblowers. Anonymous tips were sent to regulatory bodies, carefully timed, impeccably detailed. I provided them with the logs I had pulled from the Pulse, evidence of Brandon's backdoor siphoning, his falsified safety reports, his illegal rerouting of communication channels. It was all there, neatly packaged and impossible to ignore. Next came the press. Headlines splashed across tech journals and business newspapers. Altera Dynamics faces major security breach. Whistleblower exposes corruption at Altera. The Pulse's architect speaks out. Of course, I never actually spoke. My name wasn't attached to any article. My face never captured by a single camera lens. I was a ghost. A whisper. In the walls of Altera, unraveling its foundation one thread at a time. I watched it all from my office window, the skyline glittering in the evening haze. Altera Dynamics was in freefall. Shareholders scrambled, the stock plummeted, and Brandon's face was everywhere, haggard and pale, his once cocky smile replaced with desperation. Public hearings were called. Brandon was summoned, along with his father, to answer for the crimes of negligence and corruption. I watched it live streamed from my office, fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup of coffee, the steam curling like ghostly whispers toward the ceiling. The cameras caught every flicker of his eyes, the beads of sweat gathering at his temple. He stammered under the barrage of questions, why safety protocols were ignored, why client data had been siphoned off, why the Pulse had become a risk instead of a revolution. His answers were hollow, weak, and with every passing second, the cracks in his empire deepened. Regulatory fines followed, crippling ones. Altera Dynamics was forced to pay millions in settlements, its reputation shredded beyond repair. Brandon was ousted from his position. His father issued a public apology, his voice strained with defeat. I watched it all unfold, my heart steady, my gaze unblinking. The aftermath was almost too perfect. The whispers began slowly at first, industry leaders mentioning my name in hushed tones. Harrington Dynamics was booming. Competitors reached out for consultations. Even some of Altera's old clients, desperate for stability, found their way to my door. And then, it happened. My phone buzzed late one evening, the screen lighting up with an email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Lydia Holmes, head of software engineering at Crescent Technologies. Her message was short and to the point. I always knew it was you. They're restoring your name to the blueprints. I thought you should know. My hands shook as I read the words over and over, my breath catching in my throat. I pulled up the archived files of the Pulse, my fingers flying over the keys. And there, it was plain as day, etched into the digital schematics for all to see. Communication Architect, Olivia Harper. I stared at it, my vision blurring with tears I didn't realize I had been holding back. Years of my life, my work, my sacrifice, finally given its place. My hands brushed the screen, fingertips tracing, the lines of code that bore my name. It was mine again. All of it. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I crafted one last email, encrypted and masked, sent directly to Brandon Alcott's personal address. The subject line was simple. "Are you enjoying the show?" I watched the screen, waiting. Minutes ticked by before his reply came through. It was only 3 words. "Who are you?" I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping rhythmically against the wood. I let him wait, savoring the silence that stretched between us, the power that I held now, power he had never imagined I could wield. Finally, I replied, "The one you erased." I never heard back, but I didn't need to. The silence was enough. I spent the final days of Altera's collapse in my office, the windows thrown open to the city's hum, the breeze whispering against my skin. My desk was clean, the clutter of the past cleared away, replaced with polished surfaces and neatly stacked files. I poured a glass of champagne, the bubbles rising in delicate spirals. Outside, Altera Dynamics crumbled. Lawsuits piled up, executives resigned, and the board splintered under pressure. Brandon's father retired, the Alcott name a whisper of disgrace that rippled through corporate circles. I watched it all unfold from my window, the skyline stretching out in glittering fragments. I had built that empire once, breathed life into its walls, only to be discarded like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I raised my glass to the window, watching the world burn with corporate greed and shattered promises. "This time," I whispered, my voice steady and sure, "they won't forget me," and they never did.